Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'd like to thank you for joining us. This is the Western Center for Agricultural Health and Safety monthly seminar. We have every first Monday of the month at 4 p.m. a seminar series where we get to hear from researchers, community members, and safety professionals in the agricultural industry. And so we're really pleased to have you here. If you have missed any of our prior seminars, you can find them on YouTube, where this one will be tomorrow. So in case you need to leave early, you'll be able to find it there tomorrow. Okay, next slide. So I'm going to first just go through a few housekeeping items. This seminar is being recorded. All participants are muted. And during the presentation, if you have questions, please use the chat function. We will reserve time at the end of the presentation for your questions. We also hope to have Spanish interpretation. We've had a delay in getting that set up, but we believe that it will come on during the course of this presentation. When it does, you will see what looks like a little bit of a world symbol down at the bottom of your screen. And when you see that, you can choose Spanish as your language in order to hear the translation. And so there will be simultaneous interpretation, hopefully shortly. Okay, and I'm really pleased to introduce our speaker today. Jose Perez is the Senior Manager for the Environmental Health and Safety at the Wonderful Company. I'm sure many of you are very familiar with Wonderful Company products, whether they be small halo tangerines or cuties like the ones that you see on the screen here, or pistachios, pomegranates, water, many products. And behind those products are many thousands of workers. And so Jose is responsible for helping ensure a safe and healthy and safe work environment. Apologies. So I'm going to turn it over to him and he can talk about how he does that. Thank you so much, Jose.
Perfect. And can you confirm you can see my slide?
Yes.
Great. Well, thank you for allowing me to come and speak and really serve with this topic. You heard from Heather. I have the privilege of serving the workforce that is responsible to getting all of these great products to consumers, and truly see that as that role, as a servant role. In our organization, the belief is that we are here to serve our employees, and which in return is the best way we can serve our customers. So we appreciate the opportunity to come in and speak with you. The topic today, frontline leaders and the role that these leaders have in enhancing the culture around safety in an organization. And I'm going to pause here for a moment just to make clear that when I'm speaking about leaders, I'm referring to those formal and informal leaders that carry so much weight and really make or break sometimes some of our safety programs, specific around the culture of safety. So we'll talk a bit about that. Which I believe it's an important element to discuss. Often these frontline leaders carry so much responsibility, carry so much expectations on their shoulders, and it weighs a question. It really brings the question, are we doing everything we can to set them up for success? So that's really part of our dialogue, our conversation that we're going to be taking on today. First and foremost, just to kind of, before we get started, this is a standard disclaimer. The opinions expressed, my opinions that I will be expressing today are solely mine and do not represent my employer or the center. These opinions or beliefs that I'll share with you today are based on really my experience serving a workforce and a multitude of industries, and I'll share a bit about that with my background. The goal for today is really just to generate dialogue around this topic, provide a space to bring up questions, to share some of the efforts maybe that are taking place in some of your organizations, At the end of this session, really, it's going to be up to each and every one of us to establish our individual opinion around the subject, specifically talking about, those frontline leaders. One of the questions that I hope the group will walk away from after our conversation is, are we doing everything we can within our organizations to set these leaders up for success? We know these expectations that we put on them are clear and evident, but the question really is, are we doing everything we can to help them be successful? So then in return, we can hold them accountable for such a critical role they have as frontline servant leaders. So that is, again, the conversation that we're going to take on today. A bit about my background, and this is an image that I like to bring forth when I speak about my background. I am a practitioner in environmental health and safety. I've had the privilege to serve the workforce for over 18 years. My start in the profession goes back to the fields, where a lot of my development around leadership really took place. I tell colleagues and friends, I learned servant leadership, I learned emotional intelligence in this field here, and by the best teacher mentor that I could have, which was my mother. I had the privilege to work along with her for a couple of years shortly after immigrating to this great country. And there in the great fields, my mother shared with me knowledge that, quite frankly, personally, I wouldn't have otherwise learned anywhere else. And I just think it's such an important thing for me to share with the group, so you know more or less where I've come from and my background as I speak about leadership and serving others. In this field here, I learned, again, what it means to lead and serve, and really where my passion for our industry really began. I've had an opportunity to work in different industries over the 18 years, construction, manufacturing, oil and gas, mining. I've had the opportunity to serve in different industries, but agriculture certainly is, for me, what feels like home. So returning to agriculture was coming back home for me. And I just felt I wanted to share that with you, that bit of an introduction. As a practitioner, I've held different positions in different organizations. In my past life, I've had my own consulting business. So I've had the opportunity to see and practice safety in different ways at different levels of what an organization would require, from a technician in the field to a director to own my own business to now in a corporate world. And I can tell you the opportunity there that presented for me was really to learn, to pay attention and learn. And as a student of leadership and advice to the group, that is the best thing we can do when we want to develop our own leadership, is to be quiet and still enough to learn and humble enough to accept what we don't know and where we can grow. Now, to our conversation, there are 4 elements that are really going to focus our conversation around today. The value of safety leadership in the workplace, and I'll talk a bit about those frontline leaders. And then we'll discuss some of the elements around development. And I look at these as both core and essential elements. And we'll close up with some resources, just a couple of examples of some resources available out there for development of these critical leaders. So let's get started. Started off with the value of frontline safety leadership. Leadership, I think we can all agree, is a subject that whenever we hear a conversation is taking place around leadership, whenever there is development around leadership, I believe we're naturally attracted to that. We are naturally attracted to leadership. We're naturally attracted to that desire to become better leaders. I think this is by design. I believe that it is in our nature to look to improve how we lead and serve others. Equally the same, when we see, it's a great representation of leadership, when we see a leader in action, we have high expectations for those leaders as well. Think about any time in your career or your personal life where you looked at a leader and held that individual at such a high expectation, then when this leader failed to meet that image or that idea you had around what the leadership should be, well, their view changed. Your view of them changed completely. The impact that individual had or that influence that individual had on you also drastically changed the moment they don't meet these expectations. And I think this is critical for us to understand as we discuss our frontline leaders. These expectations that this frontline leader or leaders face are coming from two directions. When we speak of a supervisor, when we speak of a lead out in the field, this individual has expectations from the organization, but also from what used to be at times their past peers that have now become those he or she leads. Expectations coming from both angles. You can imagine, I'm sure a lot of us have been in that situation where we feel torn, we feel like maybe it'd be beyond our own abilities, but just having all these expectations. I share with you my experience working in different industries. Specifically to our conversation today, I can tell you it didn't matter what industry I was serving at the time, what industry I was learning from. A few things were very clear to me. One, safety is safety, regardless of the industry that I found myself in. I had colleagues, I remember colleagues telling me, well, that industry is completely different from that industry. So how is safety practiced? Or what are the challenges? Certainly every industry has their own specific challenges at times, but when we talk about workplace safety and worker safety, there's so many things that are common. They're very things are very similar. Same can be said about workplaces where there's more than one language. Safety is that one element that we can all find agreement on, that we have many opinions come together and be in agreement, because it's such a universal thing. During my experience in these different industries, I was able to observe that, as I mentioned, safety is safety regardless of the industry that I found myself in. But I also was able to learn while observing different leaders at different industries, and specifically that supervisor, leader, or lead role. That position, regardless of the industry, was such a critical role for that organization. And I'm talking about an organization at different sizes. I've had the opportunity to learn from those frontline leaders on a small organization, but I've also seen and learned from leaders in larger organizations. At the end of the day, the learning was the same. Safety is safety wherever we go. And that leader, regardless of the industry that they're involved in, that role is still just as critical. During my experience in the different times and different organizations that I served, I saw different variations in how well we prepare those frontline leaders, or how well we communicate with them, how well we set them up for success. Even though the challenges were the same, at times, how we prepare those leaders was slightly different. So let's talk a bit about culture. We start this conversation today with frontline leaders and how they enhance a safety culture. Well, I think it's important for us to first and foremost discuss a bit about culture and what our definition for today in the context that we're utilizing this word culture will be. Culture happened in the last 3 to 5 years. It's become a much more common word. It's come up in conversations much more than before. I can tell you 10 years ago, safety culture wasn't necessarily a topic that I would hear with a lot of frequency, regardless of the industry that I was in. Now you hear it more so. So what is this? When we talk about safety culture in that context, it's important for us to understand that culture drives safe or unsafe behavior. The culture of your organization is going to do just that. Drive for safe behavior or unsafe behavior. What will determine that is your own culture in your organization. Now, one thing that's important to understand here is when we speak of culture, we have to first and foremost understand where we're at, be able to look ourselves in the mirror and understand what is it that we actually value in our organizations. What are your actions say? Not your banners, not your posters, safety first, but what is actually the culture around safety at the different levels of an organization? Because ultimately that's what drives that behavior, safe or unsafe. Second, culture supports or undermines the elements of your safety program. What do I mean with this? In my prior life, I had the opportunity to write compliance programs. And, you know, a well-written compliance program, I believe, can have an impact in an organization, so as long as the individuals in the organization and the organization itself drive success on that program. And a frontline leader carry a lot of weight when it comes to these safety programs, whatever the program in reference. Here in California, we could be talking about the Injured Illness Prevention Program, your heat illness program, or most recently, your COVID-19 prevention program. Culture will support or undermine the elements on your program. And the difference on that program becoming a living document in your organization or simply something on a binder that nobody bothers to read. I believe we've all experienced all of those situations. My message today is your frontline leaders play a critical role on the potential success of these programs and your overall safety culture in your organization. Why? Because they are the face of the organization. They are closest to those that we serve. Think about this for a minute. They are the closest ones to the people that we serve. And when I say we, safety professionals, you interact with the workforce, but I can guarantee you don't interact as much as the frontline leader does. If you're in management or CEO role, you interact with your workforce, you oversee the entire organization, but you do not interact with your frontline workers as much as that frontline leader. They are the face of the organization. It is them that drive the success of these programs. It is them that, quite frankly, make that banner on the wall that says safety first, true or false, by simply their actions, their beliefs, what they support, or what they don't support. I can tell you from my experience in the profession, I've seen at times a frontline leader not support a safety program simply because they didn't understood what their program expected them to do. They didn't understood how they would contribute to the success of the program. At times, some of those leaders, their interaction with the safety program was simply, here's the program, make sure employees are following it. Just like anything else, folks, we have to explain, we have to share the why. Just as we have to do that with all of our workers, our frontline leaders need to hear this message. And there needs to be an alignment between the very top hierarchical level of the organization and our frontline workers. That alignment needs to take place so then the mission and the vision of the organization is driven all the way through. Culture supports or undermines the elements of your safety programs. Culture drives safe or unsafe behavior, and your frontline leaders are the very forefront of these dynamics. As I mentioned, your frontline leaders have that responsibility, your supervisors, your leads. I utilize this image to share with groups the role and the connection between this middle management leaders, this frontline leaders. You see the pyramid there are employees that are being served by the very top and the center of that pyramid. They are being served by both of those groups. But I've also seen organizations challenged by not having alignment between the top and the frontline workers. Alignment that takes place by that critical management role or middle section of this, which is your supervisor, your leads, your managers, the folks that are serving employees on a daily basis. Now, the image to your left, when I came across this image for today's session, I thought it spoke quite well on the many responsibilities that a supervisor would carry out in the field. And if you look at it, I'm only showcasing safety responsibilities. Let's be honest, the safety responsibilities of a supervisor out in the field are just one of many responsibilities, the many hats that they have to wear during the course of the day. And I'll tell you what, folks, it is a lot of responsibilities. So again, the question there is, if they have so many responsibilities and they play such a critical role in your organization, what are you doing to prepare them to be successful? What are you doing to prepare them to serve and serve well to those employees that are really serving our customers at the end of the day? It is them that really drive all of these efforts and our products out to the customers. Specific to our industry, this frontline leaders, formal or informal, are out there every day doing their work, doing what they're expected from them, and many times exceeding expectations. So let's use this as an example. The natural dynamic that often takes place in an organization is that elevation from an employee to a position of responsibilities. You have an employee that is doing a phenomenal job on the task at hand, and now you've identified them as a great potential candidate to be elevated to a position of leadership, to become a supervisor. Now, they've done a phenomenal job at whatever their prior task was. So there's an assumption that they're going to do a phenomenal job going forward. And this assumption takes place at times in a way that limits how much we prepare these leaders, because we have this assumption that they're going to be successful. Maybe because they've been with their organization for many years. Maybe because they're so efficient at their job. Maybe because among their peers, you visibly see how well they communicate, how well they interact, how their peers come to them naturally to ask for guidance, even though they don't carry an official title. So you would think they have all the elements already in place. Well, they might have some of the elements in place, but it certainly doesn't take away from the development that needs to take place from an organization standpoint in order to really help that individual be successful. There's some development tools that need to be provided to those team members. What are these elements? As I mentioned earlier, from my experience, I break those two elements or areas of development on what I call the core elements and the essential elements. Which is more important? They're both equally important, but certainly without having either one of them, you are limiting how successful that frontline leader will be with their groups, within the organization and within their own groups. So let's start off with the core elements. Again, an example, you have Jose, who's been a great tractor driver for X amount of years in the organization. He's done a phenomenal job, and you believe Jose has what it takes to become a leader or a supervisor in your organization. If you are like many organizations, you see this as a recognition of their hard work, and you hope that they see the same. When you take on that conversation with Jose, you present him with this great opportunity. They're going to become a supervisor. You may or may not know this, but Jose is a bit nervous about the change. And here's the reason why. To drive a tractor in this case, Jose had training, the development experience to become a really good tractor driver. But now the responsibilities change. Now the responsibility includes leading people, leading what at most of the times the case is co-workers, that from one day to the next, they will have a shift on the dynamic that went from my co-worker Jose to my supervisor Jose. There's a shift in dynamic there that takes place that we need to be conscious about. And I'll talk more in detail. But you have Jose who's taken on this new role. What development, if any, do we give him? When you first gave him the keys of the tractor, you certainly didn't say, hey, do you know how to drive tractor? Yeah, okay, here you go. There was some development there. To make sure that Jose knew how to operate it, not only operate it well, but in a safe way, there was coaching, there was development that took place. And come on, we've all been there. For all of us that have operated this type of equipment, we didn't just jump on this equipment and just knew our way around it. That's not the case. And neither is leading people. Neither is serving others as a leader. It is something that needs practice, development, and a conscious effort from, in this case, an organization to help build up that leader. This is particularly important because these leaders that I speak of that we need to develop and spend time doing this so carefully are going to be in the same position with those they lead. One of the many responsibilities we have from these frontline leaders is to help develop others. My question to the group, how well can a leader do that when very little development and care has been given to themselves by the organization? This is why it's important for us to understand. To grow leaders, which is what we ask the supervisors to do, we need to first help grow them. And that takes more than, congratulations, you're a supervisor. Here's your phone, here's your laptop, go to work. It takes more than that. And it takes more than just learning new skills. Sometimes it takes adapting to the new dynamics that they're going to face. From going from what I was a co-worker to now I'm their supervisor, that's a shift in dynamic that, believe me, if you've been in that situation, it's not at times an easy one. You think you're the hardest critic, you'd be surprised sometimes what our own peers what kind of feedback we get when a situation like this happens and we find ourselves taking on a leading role or a leadership role. So these elements are important for us to consider. On the core elements, there's 5 elements that from my experience and my practice, I've seen carry specific value around the development of a frontline leader. And I'll start off with the core elements. You have company policies, you have performance evaluation, labor law, workplace safety, and technology. And I mentioned technology specifically because this is a great example of an area of responsibility that shifts or dynamic with just technology. When I was an employee versus when I'm a supervisor, that dynamic changes drastically. But very often, we believe that's just something natural that people will just figure out. I'm not sure how you feel, but when we started in the virtual world, Zoom meetings, Microsoft Team meetings, GoToWebinar meetings, you call it, whatever virtual world you were in, it wasn't just something simple for us to figure out. As a matter of fact, as I started today, this session, we were getting ready to launch it, I had someone remind me, Jose, you're on mute. It is such a new thing, just managing technology, that we often forget the importance of making time to help develop those frontline leaders on that element alone. Now, if we were to make a case for development, the 3 comments that you see there are comments that I've heard firsthand from exceptional front leaders that are, quite frankly, just concerned that they may or may not do a good job. These are folks that just want to be good at their job as leaders, but they're facing this change and so many uncertainties come to mind. So many new responsibilities. Will I ever figure it out? Will I ever get it right? So much information to know. This is so much more than what I was used to. Can I really understand it all? And that last one that's so critical. People expect me to have all the answers. These are expectations, not that we place on these frontline leaders. These are comments from frontline leaders from expectations they put on themselves the moment they are given this position. These are folks that just want to do a good job. And these are concern areas for them in the sense of, will I do a good job? Will I meet the expectations? Will I serve, and will I serve well? These 5 elements, these are not very different from one organization to another. When we talked about company policies, there's got to be a dialogue and a development around this. What are the expectations from the company, from the employee? How to best utilize resources, and something at times as critical, but yet basic, but yet critical to the everyday, day-to-day responsibility, just as timekeeping and keeping up with benefits and being able to understand benefits enough to answer questions that might come up from the frontline workers. Be surprised at times in my prior life, I would come across frontline leaders where they were given a position, a role, but yet the rest of the information came at time in chunks and pieces. And all they wanted is to have the right information when the question was asked. So the importance here is to prepare those frontline leaders in all these many different areas where development is critical. When we talk about performance evaluation, having a conversation with these frontline leaders on how does it look to achieve those established goals? Do they understand the goals of the organization? Have we shared those in detail with them? Have we expressed to them what their role is now as they're placed in this new role? Employee recognition. Such a fundamental part of any leader's role in any organization, quite frankly, but at times very little time gets spent in having discussions with our frontline leaders about what it takes to recognize an employee, to recognize safe behavior, to recognize good work out there, and giving them examples of what that would be in a way that they can become comfortable with this new role, which it is at times a new role for some of the folks. Now, disciplinary action, nothing easy about that. Supervisors are required, individuals in these roles are required to definitely, support the policies of the organization, and at times apply disciplinary action. We've had the conversations around how to sit down and have this dialogue with an employee. It's not easy. Nor is the last there employment terminations. If a supervisor has to deal with this type of elements, what type of preparation is taking place prior to that? Now, I'm not here saying that your supervisor has to take on all of the responsibilities, but they should know information behind these areas. And if they are required to act upon any of these, then development should take place prior to the first time that they have to recognize an employee or apply disciplinary action. It shouldn't wait till then. If that is the case, then that individual has not been set up for success. Labor law, only few things change as quickly as safety regulations, and labor law is definitely one of those things with changes happening from year to year, changes in law, changes in the way we run business. That frontline leader needs to understand that information as well. They need to understand not only their role in the organization, but also how to uphold this labor laws. What is their role within the organization to protect those workers? It goes beyond just the day-to-day task to make sure the work gets done. you can see now there are so many areas of responsibilities that potentially these frontline leaders have. The question again for the group, how much development are we doing around that within our own organizations? Workplace safety, we talked about enhancing a culture of safety. Well, your frontline supervisors, I can't stress it enough, safety programs, make or break. Just by missing that connection with a supervisor at times. I've seen colleagues in my career where, well, I created this great safety program. Great, that's good. Have you had conversations with your frontline leaders about it? Well, they're gonna get it on an email. No, they shouldn't get a final document on the email because this document should not be created in a bubble. Your frontline leaders, your frontline supervisors should be part of your development team when it comes to safety programs. They should be helping build the safety programs. You should be asking questions to the frontline leaders. Again, the reason, because they are the closest to those that we serve. The purpose of a safety program is to protect our workforce. Who gets to be closest to them if not our frontline leaders? They are a critical individual when it comes to developing the safety programs. Ask yourself this question. When you wrote the last safety program in your organization, how much input did you actually receive from your supervisors prior to the document becoming a requirement in your organization? During the time of development, during the time where that document was in draft. We asked so much from them in the workplace safety realm. We asked them to conduct inspections, to correct hazards, to do training, to educate the workforce. And we have so many things that will come up in the course of this. Well, you need to facilitate training. What type of training will a supervisor facilitate on any given day here in California? Well, you name it, IIPP, heat illness, wildfire, COVID-19, so many different things, just to name a few. Have we spent the time to help them understand? And more importantly, have we spent the time to help them become good facilitators and comfortable? Because it's not easy being in front of a group of folks. Accident investigation. Another great example of the value of that frontline supervisor. If you are going to get to the root cause of an incident that takes place in your organization, chances are that will happen because of your frontline leaders and their involvement in the investigation, not only in the collection of facts, but in the investigation process and on the corrective measures that we put in place afterwards. How involved they are will be a clear indication of how sustainable some of these corrective actions will be. So again, ask yourself a question during an accident investigation. How involved are my frontline leaders? Lastly, technology. I mentioned earlier, smartphones, computer software, anything specific to your industry, and nowadays e-learning. These are elements that we all need development on. We all need to better understand. And when you are transitioning as an employee to a frontline leader, a lot of these elements of technology become now part of your responsibility or become more tools on how to help you do your job more effectively. But yet, the question bears, how much time do we set aside for this development to take place? I believe we sometimes make the assumption that we are just going to get it. We're just going to understand it. I'll tell you what, I have a smartphone, and I can't recall how many times I've asked my daughter to help me figure out some of the capabilities, because apps continue to come out. There's new things that you can do with this technology that ultimately help you do your job more efficiently. So do we have something in place now to help those frontline leaders stay relevant with this technology so they can take this technology and utilize it as best as possible. So this technology can help them serve the workforce as best as possible. So these are our core elements. Now, if we are talking development and we've just covered all of these elements, then what could potentially be left out? What would be essential elements if we just heard of those that were core elements? Well, essential elements in one image is what's going to make or break it. It is all in the delivery. It is all about people. It is all about how we interact with people. It is all about how well we serve. And these essential elements focus on that. You can have the core elements. You need the core elements. You need that foundational knowledge. But if you're going to be successful, you need something else. You need something in addition to that. 3 elements that I identify as essential elements when we talked about development of those frontline leaders. And I'll take a moment now to pause and say the development of any leader. These 3 elements that I'm sharing with you here are elements that I continue to monitor, develop, and grow in my own person. Emotional intelligence, servant leadership, and communication. These 3 elements are so critical. They're not new. They've certainly become more relevant in the last decade, but they're nothing new. Unfortunately, some of these elements had a different label in the past. They took away some of the value that these elements realistically have in our everyday lives. We often refer to these elements and others in these categories as soft skills. And I believe that was a disservice to the value that this brings, because there's nothing soft about this, because there's nothing easy about this. This is, in my personal experience, the most difficult for me in personal, that has taken me the most to grow and develop within myself. Emotional intelligence, servant leadership, and communication. And I've studied, as I mentioned before, being exposed to emotional intelligence from my own mother when we were working in the fields. Prior to me even joining the safety profession, I'm talking about over 20 years ago. My mother didn't call it emotional intelligence, but looking back, that was exactly what she was teaching me. And I continued to learn that now, 20 years later. These elements are so critical for development of any leader. To the level that I will say, in my personal experience, growing and developing myself in these 3 areas had allowed me to be definitely a better, more servant safety professional. But quite frankly, it's helped me be a better father, a better son, a better community member. It's helped me become a better individual, just developing on this. And this is why it's so critical for us to introduce these elements when we're talking about leading in development of those frontline leaders. To make a case for this, some of the questions that frontline leaders have shared with me in years past: you've changed role. What are your first thoughts? Well, I've heard, how will my friends see me now? Will they feel that now I think I'm better than them? Because that's the comments that I will hear. Now you think you're better than us? I didn't ask for this. It was given to me. This responsibility was given to me by the organization, but my own friends and peers might have a different point of view on it. So much information to know. How can I keep up? And the critical question that I believe we've all asked ourselves at one point or another when we take a new role, when we change our dynamic in the workplace or outside of the workplace: do I have what it takes to succeed? For those reasons, it's important for us to focus on these 3 elements. When we talk about emotional intelligence, these 5 areas critical for the development of any leader or an individual for that matter: self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and that social skill. You've got to give individuals, you've got to give those frontline leaders all the tools to be successful. And this is a critical tool in that tool belt. They need to have it. They need to understand it. They need to see it. They need to hear how it is in action in the workplace. They need to understand the value of it. Servant leadership. Another word that is used so commonly nowadays. What does it really mean? You know, there's areas of development within servant leadership, but the easiest way that I explain what servant leadership is to others is, are you placing the needs of others before your own? Are you serving? Are you serving? Do you find ways to serve beyond those that are expected of you because of your position, because of your role? Do you actively look for new ways to serve others? And what it drives that is just the desire to serve. Communication. Effective, active listening, conflict resolution, motivation, and understanding vision and mission. This is the importance of alignment when we talked about with organizations. Does your frontline leaders understand the vision of the organization and the mission? I'm not saying, can they read it? Do they memorize it? No, folks. I'm asking, do they understand it and they understand their role in it? Because they have such a critical role in the vision and mission in the organization. Why? Because they're the closest to those that we serve. They're the closest to the workforce. It's important that there's an alignment there. These two elements or areas of development are critical for those frontline leaders. I wanted to show a couple of resources. Just our very own Western Center for Health and Safety. There's resources available there. Some of you, or many of you, probably are very familiar with it. But there's so much training and education resources that's made available there, not only for your frontline leaders, but in general. There's such good information out there. I also wanted to highlight the Center for Construction Research and Training. You're probably thinking, wait a minute, Jose, we're not construction. Remember, leadership is leadership, regardless of the industry, just as safety is safety. And there's other industries that have also put together leadership programs for frontline supervisors. The one here I'm showcasing is both English and Spanish. All this material is free, is accessible. And again, the goal is just to develop frontline leaders, just like many other organizations, to name a few. The resources are there. I understand organizations come in different shapes and sizes, and maybe you don't have someone dedicated to do the development of folks, maybe you do, but know that the resources are out there. And this very own network, the group of folks that are joining today, they've joined prior sessions, there's a network of individuals here that we could be resources for one another. If all we did was just take the time to ask and help one another and support one another. Any industry can benefit from that. The end result of this, in closing, a better experience when we take those frontline leaders and elevate them to the opportunity and the privilege to serve others. I'm going to stop now and take some questions. I'm very cautious of the time.
Thank you so much, Jose. That was really wonderful. I think it's not very often that we hear from this perspective, even though we talk about health and safety all the time. So thank you so much. And we do have many questions. I'd like to remind everyone to please put your questions into the chat, and we have time for a handful. So one question that came through is sort of thinking about how much time does it take? I can already preemptively see your answer might be, it's an ongoing process, but like imagining someone just making that transition from being maybe a field worker into a more leadership role, what amount of time are you trying to build into their experience to feel confident in that new role?
Sure, that's a great question, and you're absolutely right. It's an ongoing process, but you have to start somewhere. Ideally, you want to start by early on, before the position is given or that role change takes place. I'm talking about at the time where you are observing and identifying the leadership traits from your own workers and identifying those that might be well suited to lead and serve. At that point, those conversations need to take place. Now, once that does occur, there is no wrong answer in here on how much time you can start. I've worked for organizations that dedicated a few hours, a few days to start off, a few weeks. There's really no wrong answer here. The key is you gotta start. Their first day as a frontline leader should not be without being equipped with some tools. The worst feeling for a supervisor to have is to be in a position where much expectation is given, but no tools are given because of whatever reason, there is no time, we didn't plan for it. Start somewhere. Start small if necessary, but have a plan to be ongoing, because this development doesn't stop. You don't go to a class, sign in, sit through a couple hours or a couple days, and now you become a good leader. We all know that it's a journey, and the journey of a frontline leader in an organization is the same. To be sustainable, it needs to be ongoing. You need to make room for that development moment throughout that individual's career.
Awesome, that's great, thank you. So a theme that was throughout your presentation was the importance of sort of having the attitude of a safety culture. And sort of what are the ways that you instill an attitude or a perspective change to be focused on being a servant leader or being that leader that can show by example and so forth? How do you get those messages across?
Well, there's a lot of different ways. Certainly, it's just setting up the expectations at the very beginning, right? Sharing with them what the expectation is, but doing it in a way that you have examples within your organization of what that looks like. It's easy for us to tell a new frontline leader, we expect you to do A, B, and C. It's much easier to do that if we have real examples within an organization now to say, this is our expectation. This is how we serve in our organization. That alignment, again, with the mission and the vision of the organization, how does that connect, right? The understanding of how their role serves the overall mission, it's important. But making time to make that connection is critical. You'd be surprised how many times folks just don't do that. The mission becomes something that's just printed or in a board, in a banner or in a poster, but how much time does actually that connection of what is your role? How do you fill into our mission? How do you help us be who we are?
Something that comes out from our research and from conversations with farm workers or farm worker serving organizations is that it often is the mayordomo or the crew leader, that person of leadership right at closest interaction with the farm worker that has the greatest impact on the health and safety environment that they're working in. And unfortunately, in a lot of cases, it's not always great. And I'm not always sure if the higher up leadership of an organization is always aware about that disconnect. Where do you think that that disconnect needs to be communicated? Is it that because it's a large burden for farm workers to try to communicate up that power chain? How do you think that can be tackled so that the vision of an organization can actually be represented in the way that frontline leaders are interacting with the field workers themselves?
Yeah, that is a great question. That's a challenge I think I've personally seen in industries outside of our own. Just all industries experience that at one point or another, that disconnect. And that's why it's such an important thing to have that leadership alignment. And you do that by having ongoing conversations, ongoing dialogue between the different levels of leadership within an organization. That communication needs to flow both ways, so then the message ultimately gets to the workforce the way it was intended. Now, I'm very, very clear with this. The communication has to be both ways. It cannot just be top to bottom, because our top leaders also benefit and learn much from what is coming from our field, from the front line. So to do that, we need to be Well, we need to make time for these dialogues to take place. It can't be something that we assume is going to naturally happen during the course of the day. You need to be, you need to make the time. You need to make the time and an effort in a formal way to have these dialogues, these conversations. You know, I'll give you an example. Organizations now have, many organizations that I know have what's called a safety moment. At the start of a meeting, there's that intentional time during the day where we'll speak about safety. So equally the same, we need to have intentional moments to discuss and align the leadership around the organization, and never take that message for granted in the sense that we'll just assume people understand what we want them to, or where we're expressing, because their frontline leaders have so many responsibilities, so much. I'll tell you what, you know, and I'll go back to the comment, you know, sometimes if a frontline leader is not adopting the safety elements as strongly as we would like, it's not because they don't care about folks. They are the closest to the folks. They know these folks by name. They know them well, and they care for these folks. It's at times we just disconnected when we wanted to express the why and their role and the importance of their role. And they just get inundated at times with the many other responsibilities, but they care for the folks.
I think that's a great place to end. And we are so appreciative. We've seen many thanks coming in for this presentation, Jose. So thank you so much. One specific question about networking with you. I know that I'm connected with you on LinkedIn, so I'm going to recommend that anyone who wants to connect with Jose, at minimum, that would be a good place to start. Is that okay, Jose, or do you have a different suggestion? Yeah.
No, absolutely. Yeah. Feel free to connect on LinkedIn. And listen, and I honestly say this, people that know me know this, if I can help, if I can serve you, if I can in a way serve your efforts, I always make the time for that. I always have time to help and serve.
Thank you so much, Jose. We really appreciate your time. Everyone, thank you for joining us today. Be sure to join us next month, the first Monday of March. It's already February, so next month is March. See you then. Bye.